Okay, we're starting. Good morning, good morning. Everybody grab your seats, please. You're up. Okay, we've got our great president, Ben Golub, who will be starting this morning's festivities. And thank you all for joining. Come on in.
Good morning. My name is Ben Golub, and I'm very proud to serve as the president of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear. We're not hearing.
Here, eat the mic.
What?
Eat the mic.
Oh, you have to eat it.
Okay.
That's the rule, yeah. Okay.
On behalf of our chair of the board, Cheryl Fishbein, past president Janice Shorenstein, our officers and board of directors, CEO Emeritus Michael Miller, Interim CEO Noam Gilboord, and our amazing staff, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2024 Congressional Breakfast. We are grateful to the UJA-Federation of New York for continuing a decades-long tradition of hosting JCRC's signature event, and we also express our deepest gratitude to Craig Newmark Philanthropies for sponsoring the breakfast for the second year in a row. Craig, where are you? We greatly appreciate your generous support and continued friendship. I'd like to take the opportunity to also express our appreciation to Noam Gilboord, who stepped up and served as our interim CEO during our transition period. While we knew it would be a challenge, we could never have anticipated how extraordinarily difficult these past few months would have been. Noam, under your leadership, the JCRC did not just tread water, but thrived, and we all owe you a debt of gratitude. We are truly fortunate that you will still be playing an integral role with the JCRC as our COO and our Chief Community Relations Officer.
Thank you.
I'd also like to officially welcome our incoming CEO, Mark Treyger. Mark is a longtime public servant, having completed 2 full terms at the New York City Council, where he served in several leadership roles, including chair of the Education Committee. In the Council, Mark was a consistent and reliable supporter of the Jewish community and the State of Israel, and he even joined us for a JCRC study tour in 2015. Mark is currently completing his role as the Director of Intergovernmental Affairs and Senior Education Advisor to Mayor Eric Adams and New York City Schools Chancellor David Banks. Mark will be joining the JCRC officially on March 4th. Mark, it's so great that you're able to be with us today. Can I invite you up to the podium to say a few words?
I love you too. Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, come on, we could do better. Good morning.
Good morning.
Listen, this is the Brooklyn boy energy on a Sunday morning. I want to thank you, of course, our wonderful JCRC board president, Ben Golub. Our wonderful JCRC board chair, Cheryl Fishbein. The great interim acting and friend, CEO Noam Gilboord, for all his great work. To all of the amazing JCRC board members and the incredible staff, let's give them a hand as well.
Yay.
To our great UJA host, rep by Hindy Poupko, the Senior VP of External Affairs. Thank you, Hindy. Of course, we have the Acting Consul General of Israel, Tsach, Saar. I want to thank him and all of our great elected officials, religious and community partners, and of course, Craig Newmark for sponsoring this wonderful, wonderful breakfast. Let's give Craig a round of applause, please. Those of you who might know me, and those of you might not, let me say this. I am a grandson of both Holocaust survivors and World War II veterans. I am a son of immigrants from the former Soviet Union that fled religious persecution and economic turmoil. I am also a proud former educator that used to invite Holocaust survivors to speak to my classroom. Also, proud former counselor at the Kings Bay Y from Brooklyn as well. Proud former New York City Council member that started his tenure right after the worst storm in our city's history, Superstorm Sandy, and concluded in the middle of a pandemic. And currently still serving Mayor Adams and Chancellor Banks as a senior education advisor, helping children in all of our communities. And with those experiences, I am thrilled, eager, and humbled to become the next CEO of JCRC-New York. JCRC-New York will be at the forefront of grassroots coalition building to ensure that we protect and celebrate the Jewish identity, as well as the safety and security of all New Yorkers. And particularly in this moment in a post-October 7th world, where we are still praying every day for the return of over 100 hostages who should be with their families right now. And in particularly with the significant increase in hate crimes where the Jewish people are disproportionately impacted by the level of anti-Semitism across New York and across the country. But I want to say that we're not starting from scratch because of the amazing foundational work put together and organized for years by the outstanding staff of JCRC New York. Let's please give the amazing staff of JCRC New York a big round of applause. And all the goodwill from members of the board and volunteers, religious community leaders, and I'm going to close by saying this. As a former history teacher, there is a certain lesson that we have seen passed on from generation to generation, going back to hateful and hostile empires, pharaohs, monarchies, to Saars, to evil dictators and tyrants from the 20th century to modern-day terrorist groups today. And that lesson is, never underestimate the heart, the strength, and the resilience of the Jewish people. We will prevail again. Am Israel High!
He's terrific, right? Thank you, Mark. Even though you haven't officially even started with the JCRC, you've already made a great contribution. He knows what I'm talking about. He's made some great contributions. We definitely benefit from his wisdom and advice. This breakfast is one of the most important events in the New York Jewish community's calendar. We bring together Jewish communal leaders from New York City, Long Island, and Westchester, and our many other partners to hear from our exceptionally informed and dynamic congressional delegation. We articulate the foremost items on our agenda as expressed in the Focus on Communal Priorities, which you can find on each table. This morning provides us a unique opportunity to hear personally from our delegation's perspective on issues of concern to all New Yorkers and those of particular concern to the Jewish community. Today marks 120 days since the horrific events of October 7th. Ironically, when the Jewish people want to wish someone a good life, will say, "May you live to 120," which is how long Moses lived. Today, that number 120 has a very different meaning. For the hostages and their families, each of these 120 days has felt like a year filled with terror that we can only imagine. We must not rest until the hostages are home with their loved ones. We are indebted to President Biden and the vast majority of Congress for their support from day one, and we urge them to continue to vigorously champion the immediate return of the remaining hostages. This must be our unconditional prerequisite for any ceasefire, A ceasefire without the return of our hostages is unconscionable. We are honored to be joined today by some of the family members of the following hostages. And I'm going to read these names, and let's remember, they're human beings. They were kidnapped by thugs, and we know how we think about kidnappers, and somehow or another the translation of hostage somehow misses the fact that we've had over 100 people kidnapped and held by ruthless, brutal people. Eden Alexander, Yarden Shiri Kafir and Ariel Bibas, David Cuneo, Amri Maran, Omer Neutra, Omer Shem Tov, and Hanan Yablanka. Speaking on their behalf now, Ronen and Orna Neutra. Their son Omer was raised on Long Island and was serving in the IDF as a tank commander when he was taken captive by Hamas. Please welcome Ronen and Orna.
Are they showing it now? They need to show it first.
Oh, you need to show it first? Okay.
Can we show the video first?
They know you're waiting for it?
Hindy's standing there, she knows.
Name on board? No.
We had an opportunity to come to the United States, and little did we know that we're going to start a business. We're going to have our children born here.
We embarked on our journey with our new family, which is the Schechter family.
He was the captain of the soccer team, then he was the captain of the volleyball team, then a captain of the basketball team.
He started off at the Mid-Island YJCC, then he went 2 years in Sprout Lake, then USY Wheels, then JNF Roots in Israel, and then he was a staff at Raman Nayak. He's a person that brings people together, and he does it out of the good of his heart. He went through the process of applying to colleges. He was accepted to a few places. He committed to going to Binghamton. We felt that it would be a good idea to take a gap year. And so he joined a program, it's called Mechina, for Israeli kids before they joined the army.
Slowly started to build some internal conflict. Am I going back to university or am I drafting?
And he made his decision.
You don't draft an army mainly because of a culture. You volunteer because you believe it's the right thing to do, and that's what he believes.
Every time he could, he called home, and he put a lot of effort into maintaining it.
He was stationed with his team on the Gaza border. There was a lot of activity generated by the Hamas on the fence. They were throwing all kind of small bombs. They've been in the tanks working 18 hours a day. The night of October 6th, he calls and he speaks with Orna.
Omer was fairly relaxed. He said that it had been quiet on the border.
I'm checking my phone just before going to sleep. I'm starting to read reports on ground attack. So immediately I'm like texting Omer, what's going on? Talk to me. Are you okay? But we never got an answer.
A few hours later, what I'm hearing from high command, most likely he was kidnapped by Hamas.
That's the last we know about Omer. We don't know his condition. We don't know if he was hurt.
No matter what your political opinion is, why is it so difficult to see that there's a humane crisis here? This is my child. He's an American citizen. He was born here. He grew up here. Bring Omer home. Bring all the hostages home now.
Good morning. As we've shared in the movie, Israeli Americans that we are, we moved to New York in 1999. In 2001, a UJA-Federation MSW scholar student, this building was my place of work. 9 months pregnant with my firstborn Omer, I came into the building as I did every day. But September 11th was no regular day. It changed the way New Yorkers see things forever. And now our family is once again caught up in a terrorist act of immense scale. How did we get caught up in this nightmare? 121 days today since Omer was stolen from us. 121 days filled with meetings with world leaders, including many leaders here in this room, media interviews, rallies, vigils, tears, and many, many, many prayers for our son Omer and the remaining 135 hostages, of them 6 Americans who are still alive. Children, husbands, wives, fathers, parents, 121 days and nights with no day and night in the darkness. Last week was International Remembrance Day. My father, Simcha Zohar, who is celebrating his 83rd birthday today in Israel, was 3 years old and survived the war in hiding. He wrote, "Today Israel faces one of the most challenging times since its foundation. My beloved grandson is being held captive by terrorists, and it is unfortunate that yet again we've witnessed much of the Western world remain silent when faced with murderous acts against the Jewish people. Yet one cannot compare, as for today we do have a Jewish state. Only last Friday, Israel had to stand on trial in the International Court of Justice in The Hague for defending its people following the largest attack and loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust. But even there, an unequivocal call was ordered to release all the hostages unconditionally. I ache for my father, who together with us has to experience the unbearable uncertainty of not knowing for 121 days the whereabouts of Omer and his condition, not knowing when we will be able to see him again. I would add to his words that as terrible as the events of October 7th, the Jewish state is strong and will see a new dawn. And the United States of America and its people have thankfully had Israel's back. Just last Sunday, our 3rd Congressional candidates stood united with us in Plainview, New York, where we live, declaring bipartisan support for the release of the hostages and calling for action. We also met last week with Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, and received an update on the state of the negotiations, and would like to thank the administration and President Biden for their leadership and support. We're also thankful for all the members of Congress, city and state elected officials here in the room.
As we gather here today, we're informed of advanced level negotiations for a deal to release our hostages. We are cautiously optimistic that a final accord is within reach, but all of it is so fragile, and the lives of our son Omer and the rest are at stake. Our dear family members cannot afford further delays and hesitation in reaching an agreement. We need to make sure that there is a pathway to release Omer and the rest of the hostages immediately. Time is running out. The strength of the Israeli state is not the number of F-16s in the air and the Merkava tanks on the ground. The strength of Israel is with its people and its resilience. We, the families, hear voices that a deal releasing terrorists with blood on their hands is reckless. Let me tell you what is reckless. There is no such thing as a reckless deal. 1,200 murdered loved ones on October 7 is reckless. 241 hostages taken from their home and from their beds is reckless. Burned kibbutzes and villages is reckless. Humanitarian support provided to Gaza family but stolen by Hamas is reckless. An agreement to release 136 hostages, among them Omer, will be painful, but it's not reckless. It's a must. It is the only thing that can make things right. It's the only way for Israel nation to regain its resilience back again. Bring them home now. And Am Yisrael Chai.
Thank you, Ronen and Orna, and all of you for your strength and courage. Our prayers are with each of you and your loved ones. Our closest partner in all our efforts is UJA-Federation. JCRC is privileged to serve as one of its network agencies and to be the recipient of its most generous support and guidance. Please let me welcome Hindy Poupko, UJA's Senior Vice President, Communal Strategy and External Relations.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Ronen and Orna, I remember we first met on October 10th at the Commercial Plaza that night of the first large rally. In our worst nightmares, we never imagined we'd still be here. I'm sorry we're still here, and I didn't know of your history with UJA. So let's just be clear here today that the next time you walk in this building, it's to welcome home Omer. And that's what we want to see. So thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the many UJA staff and lay leaders that are in this room. Thank you for your ongoing partnership. We are so proud to be JCRC's largest funder. We have been for decades and plan to continue to be for decades. We always accomplish a lot together, but the past few months really served as a testament to what that partnership can achieve. Countless rallies, delegations of hostage families, advocacy with city and state government. There is no doubt that we are both stronger when we are all in it together. The past few months have been tragic and painful, but today's breakfast and this room is a powerful reminder of how fortunate we are to be in this city and this state. Just look around for a second. If this isn't a who's who room, I don't know what is a who's who room, right? So if anyone was wondering, we are not alone. We have not been abandoned. That the Jewish community continues to enjoy the support of the vast majority of our elected leaders, our communal leaders. We see each and every one of you. We have heard from each and every one of you, and we thank you for being here and for your ongoing support. We know that our pro-Israel representatives are the envy of our colleagues across the country. And I also want to say that we are particularly honored and so grateful to be here today with JCRC's incoming CEO, Mark Treyger. We are so looking forward to your leadership and the many contributions we know you will make. Enjoy the breakfast.
Thank you, Hindy. Let me now summarize the work of the JCRC in these times. The war against Hamas has contributed to increasingly divisive climate, making our multifaceted approach to combating anti-Semitism and all forms of hate and bias even more crucial. The JCRC builds societal partnerships, strengthens physical security through our CSI division, and educates the community about the Jewish people and our connections with Israel. The JCRC provides advice and advocacy for our city's leaders and fosters productive conversations within the Jewish community. We also develop new leadership through our Blumberg Fellowship for Jewish Community Relations and through our Center for Shared Society and its fellowships. We connect New Yorkers of all faiths and ethnicities with each other to increase understanding and reduce division, hate, and polarity. Sometimes the bubbles we live in can be walls, and we endeavor to make those walls go away and have people connect with people, understanding each other and speaking with each other. Will the past and present members of all the fellowship programs run by JCRC, including the Blumberg Fellowship, Bridges New York, We Are All Brooklyn Fellowship Against Hate, Youth Bridge New York, and Youth Bridge Brooklyn. Can you please stand up and be recognized? Through our life-changing study tours and solidarity missions to Israel, including the ones completed and planned since October 7th, we build partnerships with diverse ethnic, faith, government, and academic leaders. These trips are designed to convey the true complexities of the issues and challenges facing Israel, not to indoctrinate people, but rather to let them understand that there's a lot to the story, a lot to be understood. In fact, one interfaith delegation happens to be departing for Israel this evening. Can all participants in past missions and study tours please rise to be recognized? Thank you so much. Through events at this morning's breakfast, smaller meetings with government officials, and of course, our Celebrate Israel parade taking place this year on June 2nd, we ensure that our elected and appointed representatives appreciate the Jewish community's crucial role in the fabric of our city and suburbs and the critical importance of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Together, we make New York a better and stronger place for all. Increasingly, one of the most important ways we do this is through the Community Security Initiative, known as CSI, a joint effort of UJA-Federation and JCRC, which helps safeguard nearly 2,400 Jewish institutions in New York State. I'd like to now welcome to the podium Mitch Silber, the Executive Director of CSI, to share some insights into how anti-Semitism is currently manifesting itself in New York. Mitch?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today. On the morning of October 7th at 6:30 a.m., I awoke to the high-pitched scream of air raid sirens. I jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway of my hotel in Ashdod, Israel, 10 miles from Gaza. Guests were sprinting to the hallway and the stairwell, and I followed them. Israel was under attack. I had just arrived the day before, bringing with me 24 senior law enforcement officers, police chiefs, from Nassau, from Suffolk, Westchester, Rockland, and New York City. So from all of your districts. Over the next 3 hours, we would be in and out of bomb shelters more than 20 times. 32 hours later, we were evacuated out of Israel to Dubai and back to New York, but clearly we were the lucky ones. I lead the Community Security Initiative, or CSI, which is a comprehensive program to protect and enhance the security for all Jewish communities and institutions from Montauk to Albany. We've got a team of 18 professionals to protect 1.7 million Jews, 2,600 institutions, the largest Jewish population outside the state of Israel. The Community Security's mission to enhance security is in 7 primary ways. Number 1, coordinating with local law enforcement to protect Jewish institutions. Number 2, tracking threats to the community in the deep and the dark web via threat intelligence analysts. Number 3, responding to anti-Semitic incidents in our region. Number 4, enhancing the physical security of every institution in the region. Number 5, providing synagogues, schools, JCCs, and camp staff active threat training. Number 6, providing security assessments to enable applications for federal and state grants. And number 7, supplying a real-time communication system that links the Jewish institutions in our region as part of an emergency communication system. Little did we realize that when we left Israel, we were getting out of the frying pan and stepping into the fire. Since October 7th in New York, we have been dealing with a Category 5 storm of anti-Semitism. Bomb threats to New York institutions. Since 10/7, Jewish institutions have received over 140 bomb threats. Protests. Since 10/7, CSI has monitored over 300 anti-Israel protests in New York State. These protests include calls for the annihilation of the State of Israel, anti-Semitic rhetoric, support for Hamas and Hezbollah, and in some cases have led to violence and vandalism. While the number of protests each day has decreased recently, the protests themselves have become more aggressive. And if you don't think that the anti-Israel protests are anti-Jewish, come to one. You'll see. And that brings us to anti-Semitic incidents. According to the NYPD hate crimes data, which is what we have the most up-to-date information for, anti-Semitic hate crimes in 2023 increased by 24%. That in 2022 was a historic all-time record. And by the way, anti-Jewish hate crimes dominate. The Jewish population of New York City represents about 1/8 of the total population. Why should it be that this population is on the receiving end, as Mark said, disproportionately, of almost 50% of all the hate crimes in New York City, 48.6 to be precise. So that's the situation. What is the ask of you, our elected officials? 2 things. Number 1, continue to speak out against anti-Semitism. And I thank you all for that. And I think you deserve a round of applause. We don't take that lightly. And number 2, something more practical, go to bat for New York State and Washington, D.C. The federal nonprofit security grants issued by FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security allow synagogues, churches, mosques, schools, and community centers to put in new doors, blast-resistant windows, CCTV camera systems, and pay for security guards. In 2022, when the total pot nationally was $250 million, New York State won 18%, or $47 million. However, last year, 2023, when the total pot increased from $250 to $305 million, New York State's share fell by 1/3 to 12%, or only $38 million. How could that have happened? Clearly, hate hasn't declined in New York. In the year after a racially motivated white supremacist slaughtered black New Yorkers in a Buffalo supermarket for no other reason than they were black, the funds got cut. We need you to help you protect minority, ethnic, and religious groups in New York by pushing for New York to get its appropriate share of this important program. There should be no hate in New York State. Thank you very much.
Mitch, thank you so much for your sobering comments, and our community is so grateful to you and your team and CSI for everything that you do for us, and we are there for you. JCRC partners with the Israeli Consulate with Israel on many initiatives reaffirming the strong bond between Israel and New York, between the Jews of Israel, the Jewish community of New York. Please welcome Acting Consul General Tsach Saar.
Good morning, everyone. Congressmen, borough presidents, controller, assembly members, council members, senators? Noam, Cheryl, Ben, Mark. I think this is exactly what Hindy meant when she said we're not alone. We're definitely not alone. And to the families of the hostages, I want to say, as the official representative of the State of Israel, that this is our duty to make sure that the hostages are home safe as soon as possible. זאת החובה שלנו. You know, there are certain moments that define personal, communal, and national identities that shape us indelibly and make certain things overwhelmingly clear. October 7th was such a moment, one that exposed the extreme gulf between the forces of good and forces of evil, and made clear that the State of Israel is a vital bulwark of sanity and security against the forces of barbarism and chaos. Hamas and the Iranian overlords didn't just attack Israeli men, women, and children. They didn't even just attack the foundations of Israel as a Jewish refuge and homeland. They attacked the very underpinnings of the free world, the assumption that peace is an ultimate goal and that violence can neither be glorified or rewarded. So it was indeed the deadliest day for the Jews since the Holocaust itself, and came with similar implications. Throughout history, Jew hatred has been society's canary in a coal mine. An untreated fester of anti-Semitism is always a red alert for a society in crisis. A fact made clear in Gaza, where hate, conspiracy, youth indoctrination, and scapegoating of Jews produced a rabid frenzy of anti-Semitic destruction and ultimately self-destruction. It is also proving itself in Tehran, where the Iranian regime is appearing increasingly divorced from the welfare of its people, and it is equally a warning sign for the Western world. Israel and America share not just interests, but a deep-seated values, and the same forces that seek to undermine Israel aim to threaten the freedom and democracy that define the United States. Iran and its proxies have escalated their attacks not just on Israelis, but on American assets and interests, Houthis in the Red Sea, for example, and even American troops in their tragic murder of 3 service members in Jordan just last weekend. So it has never been clearer that Israel's enemies are America's enemies too. The Ayatollah's hate fests include chants of death to America, right along death to Israel. Separately, recognizing that Israelis deserve the freedom and security afforded to all the world's citizens is a mark of a simple moral decency. An American elected official from federal, state, and local government, especially those sitting here today, have embodied this clarity since day one. Thank you very much for that. Supporting Israel in the face of the horrors of October 7th has nothing to do with politics. It's just called being human. Indeed, firmly supporting Israel's campaign to secure itself by eliminating Hamas is the best possible way to help Palestinians, freeing them from the shackles of medieval apocalyptic death cult that has held them prisoner to its murderous agenda for more than 2 decades now. Throughout all these challenges, I extend my gratitude to the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, being an important bridge between America and Israel. From your Israel solidarity missions to your massive rallies of support, bringing together lawmakers, faith leaders, community organizers, Jews and non-Jews from across New York and the region. Your impact is great and palpable. And by bringing Americans to see Israel with their own eyes, they can cut through the noise of anti-Israeli propaganda, social media, and lingering bias to engage in a dialogue and understand our struggle on a fundamental level. So I would also like to thank the UJA-Federation of New York for your support to Israeli communities most affected on October 7th attacks. Together, these organizations are beacons of stability and hope in times of crisis. And finally, as anti-Semitism rages in America and across the globe, I salute the Jewish community's engagement and refusal to sit back and to be neutral. And I thank all the elected officials here today for taking a firm position against hate and for affirming that Jewish Americans are not alone. Anti-Semitism sounds a death knell for progress, shakes the pillars of society, and endangers America, and always signals impending hate of other minority groups. So we are at a moral crossroads. But from New York to Jerusalem to Kibbutz Be'eri, we stand together in the same and the right side of history. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tsach. We look forward to continued work with you, with the embassy, with the consulate. As I look around this room, as we get to the business of our congressional breakfast, I know that each one of you, and there are a lot of you in here, has a unique and a diverse perspective on many of the issues that we are going to be discussing. We kindly ask you to please be respectful of all of our speakers, even if you don't agree, especially when their opinion differs from yours. We expect courtesy and decorum at all times. Please know that your presence here demonstrates your deep and abiding concern for the welfare of the United States of America, for New York, for Israel, and for the Jewish people worldwide. And all of us at JCRC, thank you. We are proud to be the convening organization for this work. As we did at our last few breakfasts, we have compiled questions for our members of Congress based on those items on our communal agenda that all of you have on your tables. These questions reflect what we have heard from you in advance of today's breakfast. After welcoming Congress members, we will ask them a question. We greatly value your input and look forward to hearing from our members of Congress. Our first member of Congress said that if she doesn't leave a little bit early, her grandmother is going to yell at her for not getting to church in time. And we of JCRC support any religious expression that we possibly can. So it is our pleasure to begin our presentations with Congresswoman Grace Meng. Woohoo! Where are you, Grace? I hope she didn't leave. Come on up. Who will be introduced by Brad Korn, our board member, Brad Korn. Thank you.
Didn't realize Grace had to get to church, so I get to lead off, so that's great. Good morning, I'm Brad Korn. I'm a proud board member of the JCRC, and it's really my pleasure to introduce Congressmember Grace Meng, who represents not just my district, but the entire 6th District of West Central Northeast Queens.
Thank you.
Mr. Borough President, thank you for the shout out, yes. Serving in her 6th term, Grace Meng is the first and still only Asian American member of Congress from New York State. Congresswoman Meng serves on the House Appropriations Committee, where she's a senior member and vice-ranking chair. Grace sits on both state and foreign operations subcommittees, commerce, justice, science, and related agencies. Congresswoman Meng serves as the first chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, a co-chair of the House Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism. Let me say that again. As co-chair, Bipartisan Task Force Combating Anti-Semitism, and as vice chair of the LGBTQ plus Equality Caucus. I'll say that one again, the LGBTQ plus Equality Caucus. So it is my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce my Congresswoman, Grace Meng.
Okay, me getting to speak early was before Hakeem Jeffries walked into the room. But I'll be the opening act for our future speaker, Hakeem Jeffries. Good morning, everyone. It is good to be in this room of friends, of allies, of leaders in the Jewish community and beyond. To our Consul General, Saar, thank you so much for your leadership and for always being there for our constituents, even all the way out in Queens, right, Donovan? To the leadership of JCRC, Ben Golub, Cheryl, Noam, and Howard Pollock, and our very exciting new CEO, someone who needs no introduction, Mark Treyger. Yay! I am so grateful for the work that JCRC does, and thank you to my colleagues for letting me cut the line to speak earlier. First, I want to say that I stand here as a friend and as a sister to our friends in the Jewish community. When we were taking action to improve monitoring and reporting of hate crimes during the pandemic against the Asian American community and what we were going through the last few years, leaders in the Jewish community in New York and across the country were amongst the first to stand up for us, to pledge solidarity, and to work closely with our community to make sure that hate crimes and bias incidents were being adequately reported and solutions were being found. So I want to say thank you so much for your steadfast support and for the amazing work that JCRC does. And I have to give a shout out to Michael Miller, always. For the amazing and ever more important necessary work that you all do to help build bridges within our community and with other communities. I want to thank JCRC, the UJA-Federation, for the tremendous work that you've all been doing, especially since October 7th. Altogether, I know that our federation system has raised over $700 million to support humanitarian relief in Israel. I and many of my colleagues in the room today have been proud supporters of the relationship between Israel and the United States. And my first trip ever to Israel many years ago was with JCRC, and I see some of our alumni here, Vanessa Gibson and others who we got to travel to Israel together with. And whether it is supporting life-saving missile defense systems, to countering Iran's influence, to increasing our nonprofit security grants domestically, America's relationship with Israel is ironclad. I want to bring up one of the elephants in the room, which is this talk of a ceasefire. Many think that a ceasefire would bring us closer to peace, but it wouldn't. A one-sided ceasefire is not a ceasefire. The very definition of ceasefire is mutual, and it is an agreement between more than one party. After many protests, and I think all of my colleagues at this point have been met with protests at their office and their homes and wherever they go throughout the city and country, after many protests, I met with some of our pro-ceasefire advocates. Not once did the word Hamas come up. They never mentioned the word Hamas. So to advocate for a ceasefire without mentioning the instigator of the people who broke that October 6th ceasefire is not okay. A one-sided ceasefire is an invitation to Hamas to repeat the crimes of October 7th again, which they have already promised to do. There was a ceasefire on October 6th. We had a ceasefire. And it's also a signal to Iran that it can continue to embolden its proxies, including Hezbollah, which many people don't realize is continuing to this day to fire rockets into Israel. And instead of a one-sided ceasefire, we must make sure that Israel can defeat Hamas and return our hostages. That's what will allow this heartbreaking war to come to an end so that we can start talking about building a real, lasting peace. I want to thank families like Omer's parents who are here today and the many hostages' families who in their time of pain, in the days after October 7th, have met with us in Washington, D.C. repeatedly, not just for the sake of their own family members, but for the return of all our hostages. And our job will not be complete until all our hostages are returned. But if we want peace, we need to be focused on building bridges. That's one of the reasons why the work of JCRC is so important. I appreciate your work so much, and that's why this room every single year is filled to the max. And you bring people together, which as the Jewish community has seen more than ever after October 7th, is more needed than ever. But peace in the Middle East cannot come from inside of bomb shelters. It must come from the ability of both Israelis and Palestinians to live free from fear, with dignity, and to thrive, not just survive. After October 7th, what does this look like? Many are feeling like peace in the Middle East is as far away as it's ever been. But I continue to have hope, and I want to give a shout out to one of my mentors and my former chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, Nita Lowy. Nita Lowy passed tremendous legislation, MEPA. She literally calls me every few months to make sure that I'm on it. The Nita Lowy Middle East Partnership for Peace Act. This bill supports organizations who are continuing to do the hard work of bringing both Israelis and Palestinians together on the ground, even after October 7th. And if they continue to believe in their work, we should continue to believe in them and believe that peace remains possible. And a one-sided ceasefire would take us farther away from that. Hamas is not good for Israelis, and they're not good for the Palestinians either. But I wanted to end by saying that I know how alone and how neglected and how abandoned the Jewish community feels here in New York, around the country, and around the globe. But we stand with you. Look in this room. We are with you. We stand with you. America stands with you, and Congress stands with you. Thank you for all your work.
I just want to comment that the Congresswoman was so efficient that in her statement she answered the question about a one-sided peace ceasefire, so you can go. You're making a good job.
Esteemed guests, good morning. I am Jennifer Falk, a proud JCRC Board of Directors member. Today, it is my great privilege to introduce to you our distinguished guest, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. He is currently serving his 6th term as the dedicated representative of New York's 8th District, encompassing parts of Brooklyn, where I live, and Queens. Congressman Jeffries has achieved remarkable milestones during his service, culminating in his unanimous election as the House Democrat leader in November 2022. This position makes him the highest-ranking Democrat and an exceptional leader. Previously, he demonstrated his leadership as chair of the Democratic Caucus, the whip of the Congressional Black Caucus, and co-chair of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, contributing significantly to the development of the For the People agenda. It is truly an honor to welcome House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries to our congressional breakfast. His commitment to public service and advocacy for the people reflects the values that we here at the JCRC hold dear. Leader Jeffries, you have called Jerusalem the sixth borough of New York. Israel is now fighting for its very existence, and you have steadfastly supported its right to self-defense. There are those in your party who have attempted to condition U.S. military aid to Israel and funding of Iron Dome, which protects innocent Israeli civilians, and I would say civilians from both sides, from the thousands of rocket attacks launched by Hamas, Hezbollah, and other terrorist organizations. What assurances can you provide that an unconditional military aid to Israel will continue to be a priority for the Democratic Party? Thank you for being with us here this morning.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. Good morning, everybody. Honor and a privilege to be here with all of you. I look forward to addressing that question. Let me first, of course, just thank JCRC, the entire board, the leadership, all of my colleagues in government, from the Congress, the borough presidents, the district attorneys, I should say, of course, the controller, and all of the distinguished elected officials. It's like a Democratic National Convention up in here. But it's a testament to the importance of the Jewish community here in New York City, throughout the country, and of course, across the world. Let me begin by congratulating Mark Treyger on his elevation. Or as we say in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Mazel tov. But Mark is an incredible leader, and we're looking forward to partnering with you, of course, standing on the broad, tremendous shoulders of Rabbi Michael Miller. So we thank you, Michael. Now, as many of you know, I have the honor of representing an incredibly diverse district in Brooklyn: African Americans, Caribbean Americans, Latinos, the Jewish community, Asian American community, South Asian community, Bangladeshi Americans, incredibly diverse district. And every single aspect of the Jewish diaspora. I represent the secular Jewish community, the Reform Jewish community, the conservative Jewish community, the Orthodox Jewish community, the modern Orthodox Jewish community, the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, and as Mark knows, more Russian-speaking Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union, I represent Coney Island and Brighton Beach, than any other member of Congress in the country. I mean, Hakeem Jeffries, who knew? Only in America. But the privilege of representing such an incredibly diverse Jewish community also comes with the responsibility of making sure that we are standing up to the issues of importance to not just the Jewish community that I represent in Brooklyn, the Jewish community throughout New York City and New York State, throughout the nation and the world during a very difficult and challenging time. We will always support Israel's right to defend itself just like any other country in the world. In a very dangerous neighborhood. So as per the question, when you think about the context within which Israel's very survival is at stake, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah to the north, dangerous situation in the Sinai to the south, chaotic situation in Syria, immediately to the east of the Golan Heights, the Houthis in Yemen, Iranian proxies, of course, in Iraq and Iran with nuclear aspirations threatening to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. By the way, we will never allow Iran to become nuclear capable. But in that kind of dangerous situation, we can't handcuff Israel as it prosecutes a war of self-defense. So I do not support conditioning aid and will not support conditioning aid. I will support Israel's right to defend itself. Last observation that I'd make, of course, is that Israel has a right to exist. We have a special relationship between the United States and Israel. It's anchored in shared democratic values and shared strategic interests. It has a right to exist as a Jewish and democratic state and as a safe haven for the Jewish people all across the world. And the events of 10/7, the largest loss of Jewish life in a single day since the Holocaust, should reinforce for everyone why it's important to continue to stand with Israel, particularly given the history of the Jewish people for thousands of years confronting pain, persecution, pogroms, anti-Semitism, the horrors of the Holocaust, and then, of course, the challenges that Israel has faced over the last 75 plus years. Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And in the face of rising anti-Semitism, it's important for every community, the African American community, as Grace said, the Asian American community, the Latino community, every community to stand with the Jewish community in crushing anti-Semitism whenever and wherever it is found. That is my commitment to you. And my commitment to you is to make sure that we stand with Israel always and forever. Thank you very much.
That's it. Jen, thank you. Okay, to stand, no? Hey, where is he? Okay. Change the order.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dan Rosenthal. I'm the Vice President of Government Relations for UJA-Federation. Thank you. Thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce Congressman Adriano Espaillat, representing New York's 13th District, serving it. Rowdy crowd this morning. Serving his fourth term, Congressman Espaillat is the first Dominican American to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives, and his congressional district includes Harlem, Hamilton Heights, Washington Heights, Inwood, Marble Hill, and the Northwest Bronx. Congressman Espaillat is a member of the U.S. House Committee on Appropriations, the House Budget Committee, and he is the Deputy Chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the Chairman of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. He is also a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and is a Senior Whip of the Democratic Caucus. They are keeping me very busy. It is my honor to bring to the podium Congressman Espaillat. Congressman Espaillat, in May 2023, you gathered with other members in a bipartisan manner to discuss shared concerns among the Latino and Jewish communities. At that meeting, you referenced your co-sponsorship of the Holocaust Education Anti-Semitism Lessons, the HEAL Act, and how at a Latino-majority public high school some 10 blocks north of Yeshiva University, you helped introduce Yeshiva University. You helped introduce a pilot program on Holocaust education. Why is learning about the Holocaust, especially by student populations not of the Jewish faith, essential to addressing anti-Semitic attitudes? Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you. I bring greetings from Washington Heights. Brooklyn, don't get jealous. Thank you so much, Bronx. All right. JCRC and UJA. I'm also the co-chair of the Bipartisan Latino Jewish Caucus in Congress. Okay, so and as co-chair of that caucus, we have both Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Congressman Diaz-Balart from Florida and others from both sides of the aisle have been dealing with the issue of anti-Semitism, have been dealing with the issue of ensuring that the history of the Holocaust is included in curriculums across the country. We're piloting a project right at George Washington High School, the same high school that is now predominantly Latino, but where Henry Kissinger graduated from, when Jacob Javits went to. A hop, skip, and a jump away from where Dr. Ruth lives. And of course, literally right next to Yeshiva University. It's been a successful program, and we will continue to implement it, and I think it should be a model for the rest of the country. But let me say to you that right after the October the 7th attack, Borough President Mark Levine and I, the next day, literally the next day, held a vigil right there on Bennett Park on Fort Washington Avenue. At one time, it was called Frankfurt on the Hudson, because that's where the German Jewish community migrated during and after the war. And we held that vigil there, and I told Mark and some of our friends that were there that the friendship with the Jewish community wasn't going to be measured that day. That was easy. It was easy to go there the next day after that horrible event. We said to each other that the enemies of Israel were going to do anything they could to change public opinion. And that's when the friendship, the level of friendship to the Jewish community will be measured. And we've seen it go in that direction. And let me say something to you. Much is said about the so-called liberation of Palestine, but the sexual assault of Jewish women is not liberation, it's rape. The shooting of defenseless senior citizens is not liberation, it's murder. Abducting defenseless little kids, one of them was just a year old the other day, it's not liberation, it's unconscionable. And the common denominator in all of that is terror. And so I'm sorry to speak to you in such defined terms, but we must not sugarcoat this. We must be direct and unequivocal about it. I held at one of the local synagogues, I brought the young lady who's in charge of Jewish affairs at the White House, and somebody asked me at the audience, would I condition military aid to Israel? I said, it would be kind of easy for me to condition military aid from my air-conditioned bedroom while I watch ESPN. But being on the ground is another matter altogether. And so here we are. Everybody wants peace. I don't think anybody in this room wants war. But we must bring the hostages back immediately. Now, Debbie Wasserman Schultz and myself have been working with some embassies, Latino embassies from Latin American countries, to see if we can advocate for the release of some of the hostages. And we will continue to do that. I can't reveal the exact information because of the confidentiality of that. And we will continue to work on that. This is not something that we haven't seen before, unfortunately, what's occurring right now. You know, my office, as other offices of members of Congress, gets picketed every week, every Monday. My friends in the Jewish community have told me, and in Yeshiva have told me, do you want us to mount a counter protest? I'm sure that hundreds, if not thousands of people will show up. It will be irresponsible of me to say that, to say yes. I am not in a position to encourage conflict. I am not in the position to get yeshiva students to face off with someone else. I am in the position to bring people together. And so it will be irresponsible of me. And what I do, in fact, is I call the president of Yeshiva and I tell him, get ready, take any measures that you may need to take because I'm, again, having a protest in front of my office. And by the way, what happens to the local businesses, the kind of rhetoric that they're subjected to, the way that they block the front doors of those businesses so customers could not come in, is also unconscionable. So I stand here in solidarity with the Jewish community and will continue in a hard-nosed way. Let me finalize by saying this. The support of the Jewish community and the support of Israel must not be conditioned. It should stand on its own, Mark. I disagree totally with the concept and the idea that the support of the Israeli people should be conditioned on some debate over immigration. It should stand on its own, on its merit, on the friendship of the two countries. And so, as we move forward, immigration is an issue that has not been resolved since the Ronald Reagan years. It's been around for decades. It's weaponized every 4 years from the left and the right. And so why should we condition the help to Israel to save lives on whether or not we agree on immigration? The debate should be about what's right and what's wrong. And what's right is that the Jewish people are friends with the United States of America during good times and during bad times, and that an attack against one is an attack against all. Thank you so much.
Good morning. You know, Michael Miller made this look so easy for so many years. It's not. We're not playing solitaire up here. There's a lot of people to recognize. I think everybody in the room should be recognized, but we can't do that today. I want to take a couple of minutes to just acknowledge the presence of many of our elected officials in the room. And just to let you guys know, we will have a surprise special guest or two coming a little bit later. So first, we're going to start with the table right up at front. We'd like to welcome the New York City Comptroller, Brad Lander, Queensborough President Donovan Richards, who was right there, the Bronx Borough President, Vanessa Gibson. Bronx Borough Hall was targeted by anti-Israel activists the other night. This woman stood tall. Everybody show her a round of applause. The Manhattan Borough President, my travel buddy and the one who speaks at me in front of the Qatari embassy, Mark Levine. In the rain, the Brooklyn District Attorney, Eric Gonzalez. And Bronx District Attorney, Darcel Clark. We also have members of the New York State Senate, the Honorable Liz Kruger, Leroy Comrie, there he is, Brad Holman Siegel, I saw Brad, there he is, and from Nassau County, Steve Rhodes, who is, there he is, there we go. From the New York State Assembly. I've done a lot of assembly trips to Israel. This is a thick deck here. Alicia Hindman. Hi. Stacy Pfeffer Amato. Steve Stern. David Weprin. There he is. Eddie Gibbs. Grace Lee, Kenny Burgos, Dana Levenberg, Linda Rosenthal, Eddie Gibbs again, there we go, Andy Hevesy, Alex Boris, Sam Berger, Jeff Dinowitz, there he is, Rebecca Seawright, and Joanne Simon. And Harvey Epstein, sorry. Must have snuck in there. And from the New York City Council, just a couple left, and then we'll move on with the show. New York City Council member Eric Botcher. And right beside him, Councilmember Julie Menon. And the Honorable Gail Brewer. And last but certainly not least, the chair of the New York City Council Jewish Caucus and fellow father of kids who go to Camp Ramah Nyack, Eric Dinowitz. Okay, let's keep going.
Good morning. My name is Rivkie Feiner, and I am a proud, longtime supporter of JCRC New York and an alumna of JCRC's Community Connections Fellowship. I am honored to introduce Congressman member Mike Lawler, representing New York's 17th District in Rockland County, Putnam County, and portions of Westchester and Dutchess counties. Congressman Lawler serves on the Financial Services Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee. He's a member of the Abraham Accords Caucus, the bipartisan task force for combating anti-Semitism, and the House Republican Israel Caucus. Congressman Lawler changed his plans and took a red-eye flight from the West Coast last night to join us this morning. We are so honored by his presence. Please welcome Congressman Mike Lawler, my congressman and friend. I just asked you a question. Mike, the 17th District is home to one of the largest Jewish populations in the country and has unfortunately been the site of anti-Semitic acts. As the co-sponsor of the bipartisan Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, how do you think this legislation works to reduce and combat the proliferation of anti-Semitism?
Well, thank you, Rivkie, and good morning, everyone. Good morning. I know Leader Jeffries said that this room was like the Democratic Convention. And I am the only Republican member here. Now, for some, my appearance might be unwelcome, but to that I say it could be worse. You could have George Santos here instead, so. We took care of that. He's gone. My colleague Anthony D'Esposito could not join us today, and so he sends his regards. But I do want to recognize, before I start, the families of the hostages, especially Ronen and Orna, who have been tireless in their advocacy, in their pursuit of justice, and in their pursuit of the safe return of their son. Our heart breaks for all of you. For some of you, obviously, we have had good news, and you have had the safe return of your family members. For others, this has been a very long and arduous process. And we will continue to work tirelessly to make sure that every single hostage is returned home. To JCRC New York, to the UJA, we also have folks from the JFA and APEC here as well. Thank you for all that you do collectively and collaboratively to advance the cause of the Jewish people here in New York and in America, and your support, your steadfast support for the State of Israel. To all my colleagues in government, my congressional colleagues and my former colleagues in the state legislature, thank you for being here and for all of your hard work and your partnership and your friendship. You know, this is a bipartisan issue, and it always should be. And we should always work together on it. Last year, I went to Israel twice. I went in May to celebrate the 75th anniversary of Israel, and I went in November, a little over a month after the terrorist attack of October 7th. Both times to show solidarity with the State of Israel. The United States was the first nation to recognize Israel 11 minutes after its founding. And today, Israel has no stronger ally in the world than the United States. But the United States has no greater friend and ally than Israel. And we must remember that. When I went in May on a bipartisan delegation, we met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Herzog, Speaker Ohana, members of the Knesset. And we talked about the importance of two things: preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon and advancing the cause of the Abraham Accords and getting Saudi Arabia to the table. It's why I was so proud in May that Congressman Richie Torres and I passed through the House the Special Envoy for the Abraham Accords Act. That act passed the House in May, but we were able to negotiate it into the NDAA and get it passed and signed into law in December. That was the first bill that I've ever passed through the House of Representatives, and I'm extremely proud of the fact that it is focused on securing long-term and lasting peace and prosperity in the Middle East. Because the only way that we are going to bring about a generation of peace is for Arab-majority nations to recognize that Israel not only has a right to exist, they have a right to defend themselves, and that there must be normalized relations between Arab states and Israel. That is the objective of the Abraham Accords, and that is why it is so consequential. But beyond that, I've introduced numerous pieces of legislation. The SHIP Act. The SHIP Act targets Iranian petroleum. Why? Iran is the greatest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. $88 billion in increased revenue over the last 3 years. They use those funds to fund terrorism. They fund Hamas 93% of their budget. 93%. Hezbollah, the Houthis, other terrorist organizations. If we are to combat terrorism in the Middle East, it starts by cutting off the funds. The biggest purchaser of Iranian petroleum? China. 80% of it. We have to crack down on this. The unholy alliance between China, Russia, and Iran is real. The world is in the most precarious position since World War II. It's why I not only support the $17 billion in aid to Israel, I support aid to Ukraine. I support aid to Taiwan. We must combat this malign influence. The bill, the SHIP Act, passed the House. It is sitting in the Senate. We must move it forward, and the President must sign it into law. We have to cut the funding source off at its head. Beyond that, in the next week or so, my legislation, the IGO anti-BDS bill, which targets the United Nations, which has become a breeding ground of anti-Semitism, and specifically UNRWA, which should be defunded and disbanded. That will be coming to the House floor for a vote. But it's not just taking on the malign influence in the Middle East. It's taking on anti-Semitism here in America. It's why I introduced the Stop Anti-Semitism on College Campuses Act after that horrific CUNY Law School graduation speech. It would defund any institution of higher learning that sanctions or promotes anti-Semitic events on its campus. And it's why I introduced the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which would require the Department of Education to adopt the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism for all of its discrimination enforcement cases. This must come to the floor for a vote, and it must be signed into law. In addition, after the horrific attacks of October 7th, I introduced a resolution reaffirming Israel's right to exist. What happened on October 7th is precisely because Hamas does not believe in Israel's right to exist. They want to eradicate the state of Israel and eliminate the Jewish people. We must be resolute. Let's be clear about a few things. For those calling for a ceasefire, the fastest way for a lasting ceasefire to occur is for Hamas to surrender and surrender today. Israel is not an apartheid state. It is the only multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy in the Middle East. It is a beacon of freedom, of hope, and opportunity. And we must never forget that and never turn our back on the state of Israel. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, period. We have a lot of work to do, both in Congress and here in New York State. The federal nonprofit security grants are critical. Equally as important is supporting law enforcement and ensuring that hate crimes are actually prosecuted. 97% of anti-Semitic hate crimes are not prosecuted in the state of New York. That needs to change, and it needs to change today. There must be consequences for actions. If there are not consequences for actions, this will continue. So it starts with education. It starts with enforcement. And it starts by showing peace through strength in the Middle East. I'm Israel High.
Can I get into this one? Of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Can you hold? He's coming down, right? He's on the stairs? Yeah. So we're doing... Okay, then go.
Should I introduce him before you guys?
Yeah, go. You, your part, and you say your question too, everything, the whole thing, okay? Go.
Needs to be lower for me.
Go ahead, Craig.
Much lower. Hey, folks. I'm Craig Newmark, a new New Yorker, best known for this Craigslist thing, but also Craig Newmark Philanthropies. And I think it's important for me to do stuff like sponsoring this morning's breakfast. It's imperative for me to remember that I'm not as funny as I think I am. It's my pleasure, seriously, to introduce my congressman. Again, I'm new here. Dan's my congressman. He represents the 10th District in Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn. Congressman Goldman serves on the House Committee on Oversight
and Accountability. He serves on the House Committee on Homeland Security and the Select Committee Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. He's chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Working Group of the Dads Caucus and vice chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force. He's a member of the Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism and the Congressional Progressive Caucus. It's really my serious pleasure to welcome to the podium Congressional Dan Goldman with one question. Dan, you and your family were actually in Israel during the barbaric October 7th attack by Hamas. You were quoted at the time saying that this Hamas terrorist attack is Israel's 9/11, and we in Congress, we in the United States, have to stand up against terrorism. We must stand united with Israel to support its defense and the protection of its people. As a member of the Homeland Security Committee, what has Congress done to stand up against terrorism here at home, and how has Congress been supportive of Israel's right to defend itself? Thanks, Dan.
Thank you very much, Craig, and thank you so much for sponsoring this morning's breakfast. Thank you very much to all of my friends, JCRC, UJA, and so many others in the community, my colleagues in elected office. I was struck for just a minute thinking about what we have already seen here this morning. We had my friend and colleague, Grace Meng, speak so passionately in support of Israel, and Grace, my district has 20% of the constituents are from the AAPI community. Grace and I do a tremendous amount of work on anti-hate that affects both the Asian and the Jewish community. We had Congressman Adriano Espaillat from Northern Manhattan, who is such a leader within the Hispanic community in supporting Israel and American Jews. And we have our leader, Hakeem Jeffries, who is as strong as anyone is in this country in the steadfast support for Israel. And then my Republican colleague, Mike Lawler, who's been such a strong advocate. That shows you, I think, something that's very important to understand, which is you may hear very loud voices on one side of this issue. You may watch on television the amplification of those voices. But the voices you are heard today and are hearing today are the voices in Congress that matter, and that are the ones that are the leaders of the various different groups and caucuses, and ultimately the leaders of the Democratic Party, along with Senator Schumer, who's such a strong advocate. And I say that because it is incredibly important for everyone to understand that Congress, writ large, is squarely in support of Israel. I know I'm technically a politician, but I'm going to take off the politician's hat for a minute because, as Craig said, I was in Tel Aviv on October 7th with my wife and my three youngest kids, 9, 6, and 5. To say that that had an indelible impact on me is a gross, gross understatement, and especially on my children, who still struggle with the trauma that we experienced shuttling back and forth to a stairwell in the Tel Aviv Hilton Hotel. And what has happened after we returned is in many ways more concerning, more startling, and that somehow after one of the most horrific terrorist attacks in history against Jews because they are Jews, there's been a rise in anti-Semitism in this country. But I want to talk and focus what I think are Our only focus must be today. And I'm a strong supporter of a two-state solution. I think it is really the only path forward. I am optimistic that out of all of this misery and horror, there might be an opportunity to cultivate a two-state solution with support from Saudi Arabia and others in the Arab world. But I'm not worried about that today. I am incredibly concerned about the surge in anti-Semitism that is happening around this country that has impacted all of us in ways that I certainly could not foresee, and that has been incredibly jarring and upsetting to me. But that's not what I'm focused on right now. Our focus right now must exclusively be to bring the hostages home. We had a special order hour on the floor this week to highlight and amplify the story of the hostages who still remain in captivity 4 months later. And I highlighted one young woman who many of us are familiar with now, Noah Argamani, who people became somewhat of the face of October 7th as she was abducted on a motorcycle, screaming, "Please don't kill me," and shuttled off to Gaza. She should have been released 2 months ago under the terms of that agreement, where young women, young non-military women were supposed to be released. But she and several others were not. Hamas broke the ceasefire agreement because they refused to release Noah and about 12 other women in her category. Why? Well, we know why. We saw on October 7th why. It's because Hamas does not want these women who have been tortured and sexually abused to come out and tell their stories. And when I have met with the parents of these families, they are desperate, of course, to see their children. But do you know what they really think about when they go to bed at night? They worry that their daughters are pregnant from being raped by Hamas terrorists. It is unconscionable. It is truly unconscionable. We will have time to address the future of Israel. But my wife went with the UJA a week and a half ago to Israel. And many of you have also been. And what we know from on the ground in Israel is that Israelis are not and cannot think about the future of Israel until their friends, their relatives, their brothers, their sisters, their children are back home. And so right now, in this moment, our focus needs to be on doing everything that we can to create leverage to bring the hostages home. And it is why our support broadly for Israel, no matter what you may think about this Israeli government, and I do not think highly of it, but Israel and the Israeli people need our support because we need to put pressure on Hamas and the other countries who are coordinating with them, in touch with them, to put leverage on them to take a deal to return our family, our brothers and sisters now. So I'm grateful to see the Neutras here. My friend Liz Naftali, the great aunt of Abigail Edan, many of you are well aware of her story, and she is now back with her brother and sister, of course, without her parents who were killed on October 7th. But we have to keep the hostages front of mind right now. And I get the pressure. I get the politics. I get the desire to make a statement in support of a two-state solution when Prime Minister Netanyahu cast doubt on it. And I certainly support President Biden's actions to sanction the extremist violence, the violence from extremist settlers in the West Bank, which is just something Israel as a country cannot afford right now. That is unacceptable, and we cannot allow it. We must not allow it. But our energy must be to support Israel, to support the United States in its efforts to negotiate a deal, because we cannot move forward. Israel cannot move forward. Nothing will happen in terms of any progress until these hostages get home. And so I wear this necklace, bring them home now, every day. Wear it all around the House floor. And it is my reminder that there is only one thing to focus on right now. And I hope all of you, especially in the Jewish community, will continue to wear your Jewish stars, to leave up your mezuzahs, to lean in, because we must persevere as we always have, and we must bring the hostages home now. Thank you.
For over 4 decades in public service, U.S. Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer has built a solid reputation as a leader who finds common sense solutions to national issues and as a tireless fighter for New York. As a result of his hard work, intellect, and abilities, his Democratic colleagues elected him as their leader 7 years ago. In November, he gave a major address on anti-Semitism on the Senate floor that will long be remembered as a seminal speech in American history, which led to many Americans referring to him as the conscience of the Senate. Majority Leader Schumer has attended virtually every JCRC congressional breakfast since his election to the House in 1980.
Whoa.
Please welcome our very good friend, the highest-ranking Jewish elected official in America, the Majority Leader of the United States Senate, Charles Schumer.
Hey, Mark. Toda rabah. Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here. As was mentioned, I never miss. I always come every year. This year is probably more important than ever, but I'd like to start off. You know, we Jews have had so much, been oppressed for so many centuries, and the idea that we are oppressors is just despicable, despicable. But in any case, even in the darkest times, there was humor. So I thought I'd tell a story. Michael Miller, your former great leader, I asked him, I said, I haven't told this story in about 10, 12 years, you know, and you're around a while. So this is a story of humor. So it relates to 1992. I was redistricted from Brooklyn into part of Queens. I had half Brooklyn, half Queens. And I was campaigning to meet the new voters in Forest Hills, a Jewish neighborhood. And a lady came over to me on Austin Street and said, "You're Congressman Schumer." I said, "Yes, ma'am, I am." I was congressman then. She said, I read in the Queens Tribune that you're going to be my new congressman. I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, you know, I've never met you in person, but I watch C-SPAN religiously, and I'd like to pay you a compliment." And I said, "Well, thank you, ma'am. What's that?" She said, "You have more courage than any other member of Congress." I said, wow, that's a pretty strong statement, ma'am. There are 434 others of them. Some are no good nicks, but some are very estimable people. What makes you say that I have more courage than any other? She said, well, as I said, I've never met you before, but I watch C-SPAN religiously. And when you rise to your feet to speak, you're the only one of the 435 who has the courage to wear a yarmulke. I said, well, thank you, ma'am, but it's obvious you haven't met me before. It's not a yarmulke. Good, I'm glad I'm recycling some of my stories that I told decades ago. All right. I want to recognize the people who lead this great organization. Mark Treyger. He's been my friend and compatriot for a long time. And you know, Michael Miller did an amazing job. We're still very close. Deserves a lot of our kudos and support. But you couldn't have picked a better person than Mark to succeed him. As you know, I used to represent Congress in some of the same areas he represented in the council. So we worked together on a whole lot of issues. Rebuilding and strengthening the resiliency of southern Brooklyn shorefront in the wake of Superstorm Sandy, investing nearly $1 billion in modernizing Coney Island Hospital, where my mother-in-law was a clerical worker before she passed away, to promoting economic development and tourism on the southern beachfront in Brooklyn. You know what I admire about Mark? When he decides to get something done, he devotes every fiber in his being to it. He has two great Jewish words that we need in when we want to get something done: a macher and a nudge. So I wasn't surprised to read recently that the JCRC of New York selected Mark to lead this great organization. I want to thank Cheryl and Ben for the great jobs you do. Thank you very much. Thank you for the nice introduction, Ben. The one thing he didn't mention, which I'm sort of proud of and Noam too, COO, is that I am the only New York senator. I was elected last year to my 5th term, the only New York senator to ever have 5 terms. So thank you for that and your support through the years. Okay. Now on serious matters, and this is maybe the most serious meeting we've ever had at the JCRC, and I'm so glad to see the room filled to the rafters with standing room only. Thank you all for being here on this time so crucial to Israel and to our people here in America. First, it's been 120 days now since Hamas unleashed hell on earth on October 7th. Over the 120 days, we've watched an unprecedented outpouring of anti-Semitism here in America and across the world. Over 120 days that hundreds of hostages have been held in underground tunnels, tortured, abused, assaulted, worse. I've met the families of the hostages. It's the first time some of the very people here were in Eretz Yisrael, were in Israel when I met them, when I was the first major official, elected official to fly to Israel right after the 7th. And I am talking every day to the top leaders in the Biden administration, the people overseas in Qatar and other places, to get them free. And I just want to say this. First, we're getting closer. We are getting closer. But second, I want to say to the families, you know, when some terrible tragedy befalls you, and I can't imagine a worse tragedy than this, Dan Goldman's remarks cut right to the core. The normal human instinct, as the scriptures tell us, is to turn inward, be angry, turn to darkness. But the Bible also says that when you try to rectify a terrible injustice for yourselves and others, it's lighting a candle. You have kept that candle burning. You will keep it burning until we no longer have to light it because the hostages are free. Thank you very much. Now, all of us will remember for the rest of our lives where we were on October 7th. I was actually in China with a bipartisan delegation of my fellow senators trying to get President Xi Jinping to open up American markets and create more jobs, to open up Chinese markets to American companies and create more jobs here in America. Also to stop the flow of fentanyl in our borders. And parenthetically, we pushed him hard. We had an 85-minute meeting with him, and it's really happening. The Chinese are clamping down on these companies that send us the precursor drugs that make fentanyl, because we put a lot of heat on them. I'm very proud of that. But, so I was there, and that night I was there. The next day, the Israeli ambassador, Ms. Ben Abba, came to see me and shared me the story of what was happening. It was not really out. And she told me what happened in one kibbutz. How the Hamas, and they even got some young children to push, to tell, get the parents, the grandparents, the little babies in a rec room, and then 6 Hamas people came in and machine gunned them all down. It reminded me of our family. Every one of us this resonates to. My great-grandmother was the wife of a famous rabbi in Chortkov in Eastern Europe. And he was deceased, the famous rabbi. But the Nazis came into Chortkiv, and they told all the Jews to gather in the town square, several hundred. And they then told my great-grandmother, she had 18 children, Peru Urvu. That means be fruitful and multiply. And the 3 youngest, including my grandpa, were sent to America, but the other 15 stayed there. And she told the Nazis said to the Greater family, get on the porch of my great-grandmother's house, which is in the town square. And they said, you're coming with us. And in front of the hundreds of Jews of Chortkov, she said, no, we're not going. They machine-gunned every one of them down. So the story of what happened in the kibbutzim along the Gaza border resonated so deeply with me, because this story has been told to me since I've been 3 years old. 3 years old. So we all know how the evil of Hamas resonates. And what they were trying to do, frankly, is scare us. Tell us to lose our vitality and strength. Tell the world we are so vicious, we are so brutal, we are so mean that you don't want to touch us. They don't know who we are. Their brutality and meanness and viciousness makes us fight even harder to help Israel preserve itself and to make sure that Hamas is never a threat to Israel again. So anyway, I was in China, and we had, this was a big trip, bipartisan. I always try to do things where I can in a bipartisan way. And we were supposed to meet with the Prime Minister of Korea, the Prime Minister of Japan, the President, I don't know, I can never remember. Some are Prime Ministers, some are Presidents. I can never remember who's who. POC, Head of State. They call it, I don't know, they have some initials for them, so you don't have to remember. But in any case, I canceled the trip because I had to be in Israel. As the highest-ranking Jewish elected official in America, now and forever, I'm the highest one ever, I had to be there. Had to be there. So we canceled our trip. We flew halfway around the world. And I got off the plane, and all of Israel was watching because they were wondering, would the world stand with us? And I said to the Israeli people, first I reminded them of my name, Shomer. Schumer comes from the Jewish word, the Hebrew word shomer, which means guardian or watchman. I believe God gave me that name. And to be a shomer Yisrael, a guardian of Israel, is part of my job. And to me, a shomer of the Jewish people is part of my job. And I reminded the Israelis of that, and I said, we feel your pain, we ache for you, we have your back. And I met with the Israeli leaders, all of them, told them that, and we've been continuing to help them wherever we can. Now, a few other things. Anti-Semitism, it's reared its ugly head like in ways we never thought. And I remind some of our particularly non-Jewish friends who don't know the history. There have been many times throughout history when Jewish people seem to be safe and secure in the land they were in, never their own land, because we never had an Israel. And almost inevitably, when things got bad, somehow, there's almost some, I don't know what, some elixir, they turned on the Jews. I reminded them, I told people, my grandpa in World War I told me that he rooted for the Germans over the Russians because the Germans were so much better than the Jews than the Russians. Because in 1910 and 1920, the German Jewish community was prosperous, established, accomplished, respectful, and we saw what happened. And we've seen this over and over again in history, over and over again, from ancient Egypt and Babylonia to modern times. Now America, praise God, Baruch Hashem, has been so wonderful to the Jewish people because we believe in freedom. And we believe that everyone should practice what they believe in freedom. That came from the founding fathers. But never forget, somehow there's something in the air. And the lesson of history is extremely simple. If you don't fight it, that poison takes root, gets worse, with very severe consequences to the Jewish people. So every one of us, Jew and non-Jew, liberal, conservative, I don't care who you are, has to be fighting this anti-Semitism in all its forms. And one other thing. What is anti-Semitism? This relates to Israel. Anti-Semitism through the years has always been what's good for the Jews, what's good for everyone else is not good for the Jews. Okay? And I'll tell you a moment in my history. I was a student at Harvard. And the SDS-PLP back then, the radical organization, fights Zionist imperialism. And to prevent that from happening, we invited Abba Eban. Some of you of my generation may remember him. He was the UN ambassador, and he spoke in brilliant Etonian tones. And we had a big meeting in the big theater, Sanders Theater. And we've invited Abba Eban. And in the balcony was the SDS-PLP with a big banner. Fight Zionist imperialism, whatever that means. In any case, Eban, in the middle of his speech, looked up to them. And I used to try to do his Etonian accent, but my staff said, don't try that. He said, I want to talk to you up there in the balcony. I want to talk to you. He said, you know, when any people gets their nationhood, you applaud it. And he named countries, I don't remember which, but when the Zambians got their independence, you applauded it. When the Sri Lankans got their independence, you applauded it. When everyone gets their homeland, you applauded, except one people, the Jews. He said, we have a name for it. When everyone else could do something and Jews can't, everyone could be a farmer, not the Jew. Everyone could be a carpenter, not the Jew. Everyone could go to Moscow, not the Jew. We call it anti-Semitism. And when you say there shouldn't be a Jewish state, I accuse you of anti-Semitism. And they picked up their banner, and they slinked away, and never in the rest of the time I was up there at Harvard did the SDS-PLP, they had lots of things they were pushing, but they never pushed anti-Israel again. And we have to make that clear. Now, why should every other people get a state, especially given the history that I mentioned earlier, and not Israel, and not the Jews? Okay. One final thing, because this came about from your group. We've seen, not just in the last year, it's accelerated, but we've seen so many of our houses of worship, whether they be synagogues, churches, mosques, temples, or anything else, desecrated because hate has gone up. And so together, JCRC under Michael's leadership and I came up with this program called NPSG, Nonprofit Security Grant. And it goes to help religious institutions, and it's been because there's so much desecration of ours, we've gotten a good chunk of it, to synagogues, yeshivas, shuls, shtiblach, to protect themselves against hate crime and terrorist attacks. And it gives them money for doors and windows and cameras and things like that. They can't hire people because of the separation of church and state, but they can hire a security guard company to guard them, so that's okay. We started at 90 million. We got it up, I got it up to 180 million as minority leader. I got it up to 305 million as majority leader. It's good to be majority leader. And we're now pushing, and President Biden, at my request, has put it in his bill, not in the House bill, not in the House bill, $1 billion for this NPSG money. We need your help. We need our Republican colleagues to be for this as strongly as we are. It's not, and it's always been passed in a bipartisan way. So we need to try to keep that money in there because it is so, so important. So, folks, I want to conclude by, since you are Mishpacha, tell you about my father, who some of you may have heard. So my father had a tough life. He was a brilliant man. He was sort of a semi-hero in World War II. He flew over the Himalaya mountains. But when he came back, he had to work in this junky little exterminating business to support his family, and he hated it. By the way, my sister once sent him a Father's Day card that said, "Dad, we're the only family that associates the smell of DDT with love." Because my father would come home reeking of the chemicals that he had been working on, all day. Anyway, he passed away back in 2 years ago. And, he never complained. He was part of that greatest generation. When he died, it dawned on me, I had never heard him utter words of resentment against people who had been given a better break than him. But for those of you who've been close to your parents, particularly if they've passed recently, you know what I mean when I say he's still with me here, guiding me. He's not gone. And he gave me two values which shaped my life. Above all, one, always help people who need help. That's the most noble thing you can do. That's what our teachings tell us. And second, he says, if you're doing something important, look in your heart. Make sure it's the right thing to do. And if you're sure it's the right thing to do, persist, 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 never give up, and God will reward you and you will succeed. In our fight against anti-Semitism, in our fight for the beloved Eretz Yisrael, we will persist and persist and persist and never give up, and God will reward us, and we will succeed. Thank you, everyone. Here. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Thank you. Take care. Thanks for coming, guys.
Folks, I'll take this opportunity to welcome and acknowledge the presence of a few handful of friends. You can hold your applause till afterwards, unless you really want to shout. David Gold from the Commissioner of the New York City Planning. I heard former Congresswoman Nita Lowey was here. Ari Kagan, who represents New York City Council member Joe Borelli. Former New York City Council member Karen Koslowitz. Woo! Alexander Gurevich from the Brooklyn DA's office. Yoeli Lefkowitz, who represents New York State Attorney General Letitia James. Ruth Messenger, former Manhattan Borough President. Ellie Slavin, representing Congresswoman Yvette Clarke. From the New York State Governor's Office, the Office of Governor Kathy Hochul, Eva Weiner. From the 67th Precinct Clergy Council, the God Squad, Dr. Omar Chukwueze. Rabbi Dr. Ari Berman from Yeshiva University. Linda Ben Menashe, Executive Council of the Australian Jewry. Johann Gassner, Deputy Consul General of Austria in New York. Maria Floria, who is the wife of Consul General of the Consul General of Romania, whose name I don't have. Oh, and the Consul General of Romania. Michaela Simona Floria, thank you for being here. Alexei Goncharenko, member of the Parliament, Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. Very important. Todd Richmond, chair of the Democratic Majority for Israel. Willie Rapfogel. I didn't see him. John Greenfield, also from Yeshiva University. Cao O, president of the Asian American Institute for Public Policy. Nehemiah Oberstein from the Association of Orthodox Jewish Teachers of the New York City Public Schools. Elizabeth Velez. Where's Elizabeth? There she is. Elizabeth Velez. Good friend and partner in everything. And Rev Jacques de Graaf, friend honoree, the man, the legend. Barry Grodenchik, former New York City Council member. John Park, district leader and part of the Korean American Community Empowerment Council. Jerry Alperstein from the Jewish War Veterans Association. Jason Guberman from the American Sephardi Federation. Yep, he is. I saw him. Said hi. Avram Hecht, exec of the JCC of Canarsie. Jagdish Suwani, president of the America-India Public Affairs Committee. Fred Tang, president of the America-China Public Affairs Institute. We saw Rivkie Feiner. Anna Ortiz from the Hispanic Research and Consulting Services. And Herb Block from the AZM, American Zionist Movement. District leader Igor Galanter in Brooklyn. Louis Wells, CEO of Kojo Flatbush. Moshe Zakheim, president of Kojo Flatbush. Corey Birak from the Northeast Queens Jewish Community Council.
Oh, look at this.
I got that. Yeah. Sandra Wilkin, CUNY vice chair of the Board of Trustees. Thank you for being here. And former acting consul general in New York, Israel Nitzan. Welcome, everybody.
Okay, Karen, you're on. Yeah.
Hello. Hi. My name is Karen Kasner, and I'm proud member of the board of JCRC and co-chair of the Center for Shared Society. It is my pleasure to welcome Congressman Jerry Nadler, representing New York's 12th District on the Upper West Side, Upper East Side, and Midtown Manhattan, and my congressman. Congressman Nadler is the Dean of the New York Congressional Delegation and Dean of the unofficial Congressional Jewish Caucus. He is also ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. He previously served as chairman of that committee from 2019 to 2022 and served as chairman or ranking member of its subcommittee on Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties for 13 years. In his remarks, we're going to ask him to also include the concern that we have for Jewish students on college campuses across the country that are facing surging anti-Semitism at levels jeopardizing their safety and ability to achieve their academic goals. A recent House hearing on Capitol Hill with university presidents did little to ensure their well-being. As ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, Congressman, what can Congress do to assure and reassure Jewish students on colleges that acts of anti-Semitism will not be tolerated in these academic settings? Let me introduce and welcome Congressman Jerry Nadler.
Thank you very much. I'll get around to answering that question eventually. But first, some remarks. My father, Chuck told about his father. I'll say just one experience my father had, which he told us as kids. My father was in a unit of the United States Army in World War II. And they were marching through a forest, and they smelled something very strange. Couldn't figure out what it was. For 20 miles they marched, with this terrible odor growing stronger and stronger until they came upon Bergen-Belsen and liberated it. And then they knew what this odor was. Of course, the townspeople nearby did not know of the concentration camp, or so they said. In the Seder on Pesach, we say, B'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chalotenu. In every generation, they rise up to try to destroy us. And that is our history. as Chuck mentioned. You take Germany as an example. Germany was a haven for Jews. Some of the most important Germans, Albert Einstein, Walter Rathenau, Fritz Haber, great scientist, who among other things invented the poison gas the Germans used in World War I, were all Jewish. And we know what happened. And this has happened in land after land after land. And that's why it was decided, that's why Herzl said we need a land of our own. We need to reestablish a Jewish state in Israel. And there's no question that we need it. October 7th was a shock to everybody. It was, as everybody remarks, the largest loss of Jewish life in one day since the Holocaust. It shattered a lot of beliefs and expectations. It shattered the belief that Israel was safe. It shattered Prime Minister Netanyahu's delusion that he could encourage Qatar to fund Hamas as a counter to the Palestinian Authority so that there would never be a Palestinian state, because he is opposed to a two-state solution, which in my opinion and many others is the only solution that will work. In fact, everyone who has looked at this, from the Peel Commission in 1937 to the UN in 1947, to time after time after time, have come to the same conclusion. There must be a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. And by the way, from our own point of view, from a Jewish point of view, that is absolutely necessary. There are approximately 10 million people who live between the river and the sea. And by the way, when you see these demonstrations saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free, reporters have asked people, participants, what river? What sea? They don't know. The Red Sea, the Euphrates, they have no idea. They just know it as a slogan, as an anti-Israel slogan. But the fact is that between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, there are about 10 million people. About 5 million Jews, about 5 million Palestinians. We have two choices, and only two. We can have an independent Jewish state, democratic, and an independent Palestinian state, hopefully democratic. Or we can have one state, in which case we face a choice. Do you give the Palestinians the vote? If you do, up in smoke goes the Zionist dream of a Jewish state. If you don't, you're running an apartheid state. Neither is acceptable. So from an existential point of view, there must be a two-state solution. From a Jewish point of view, there must be two states. From a practical point of view, there must be two states. Now, unfortunately, Israel faces a terrible enemy, basically Iran. And you talk about Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis, you're talking about what they call the axis of resistance, all funded and controlled to one degree or another by Iran. And we must, the great danger is that Iran becomes a nuclear power. We had an agreement that was working very well to keep that from happening, because we had inspectors in all the plants. We knew what was going on. We could make sure they weren't enriching uranium beyond 3%. But President Trump pulled us out of that deal. By all reports, they're racing ahead toward a nuclear capability. And frankly, I don't see what can stop them, because even if, as President Biden is attempting to do, they re-enter the agreement, even if they reenact the agreement next week, and we put the inspectors back in the plants, how do we know how much enriched uranium made between 2018, when Trump pulled us out of the deal, and now is hidden in the desert somewhere In other words, it's not recoverable. So there is a great danger that Iran becomes a nuclear power. But we must all stand by Israel, clearly. And we have, Congress has. And I was very upset, to put it mildly, when the Republicans put together the idea of aid to Israel, aid to Ukraine, aid to Taiwan, humanitarian assistance, and solving the border crisis. A border crisis which has been going on for many, many years. We ought to vote for aid to Israel on its own. We ought to vote for aid to Ukraine on its own. I was happy to see over the other day, 2 days ago I think it was, that Speaker Johnson says we will now vote, in the House at least, on aid to Israel standing alone. Thank God. I hope they will do the same in the Senate. Anti-Semitism has been with us for a long time, in every country. I was asked specifically to address the question of anti-Semitism on college campuses. I'll now get around to it. The explosion of anti-Semitism around the world on college campuses and online is so shocking. I agree with Senator Schumer, this terrifying situation is a fire of alarm fire. In the face of the largest increase in anti-Semitism, both violent and virulent in this nation's history, we have no choice. We must rise to the occasion and do something real and powerful to actually help Jewish students and the broader Jewish community. Recently, Representatives Goldman, Raskin, and I introduced a resolution that would commit the country to the full implementation of the National Strategy to Counter Anti-Semitism, a historic whole-of-government approach to combating this scourge. This includes fully funding the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, the office that must protect Jewish students from the horrendous discrimination they face on campus today. In order to enforce Title VI, the law that prevents such discrimination in education, the department needs the resources to put legal and investigatory boots on the ground. Indeed, we must increase its funding. Unfortunately, the Republican majority in the House has actually tried to completely defund the office, so we must prevent this effort from being successful. Similarly, as JCRC has long supported, and as Chuck mentioned, the nonprofit security grant program needs a meaningful increase in funding. This program keeps our synagogues, our shuls, our Beit Midrashes, our Hebrew schools safe across the country. Of course, it should go without saying that the university presidents at that congressional hearing offered horrible, legalistic responses in that recent hearing. Students on college campuses deserve to feel safe and secure, and university leadership has a responsibility to protect students from harassment. Talk of genocide against Jews is disgusting and horrifying and is obviously harassment. We can and we must protect free speech on campuses. It's not hyperbole to claim that our liberal democracy depends on it. But that certainly does not mean that students should be able, without consequence, to instill such traumatic fear among their fellow students. University leadership should be held accountable by their institutions, but we cannot let one hearing distract us from the important work of actually protecting students and combating anti-Semitism. Indeed, if Ms. Stefanik, who conducted that hearing, were serious about combating anti-Semitism, she would have spoken up when former President Trump called the Nazis in Charlottesville very fine people. She would have condemned the former president when he dined with known Holocaust denier Nick Fuentes. Jim Jordan, who was the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, would have thought better before tweeting out, "Kanye Elon Trump," sending out dog whistles to their white supremacist anti-Semitic base. Especially in the aftermath of October 7th, we have a moral obligation to protect our Jewish students. As the most senior Jewish member in the House, with one of the largest Jewish constituencies in the country, arguably the largest, I have always and will always support real, meaningful action to combat anti-Semitism. It's deeply personal for me, for you, and for so many New Yorkers. I take a backseat to no one in the House of Representatives when it comes to fighting against this scourge. And my personal history is long. When I was in high school, I was a madrich, a leader in Mizrahi Hatzair, until I reflected on the slogan, Am Yisrael Eretz Yisrael Pi Torat Yisrael, the land of Israel for the people of Israel according to the Torah of Israel. And I thought to myself, I don't believe in theocracy. I cannot be a leader in this group. So in college, I was president of New York City College chapter of the ZOA, before the ZOA became more right-wing than it was. I was one of the first members of Congress to directly challenge the so-called boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel, BDS, when in its nascent form it hijacked the UN Conference on Racism in Durban for its own political purposes. I persuaded the Ford Foundation to condition its grants on the grantees' non-support of BDS. I am proud to have partnered with JFNA's Israel Action Network and with JCRC to consistently challenge the BDS movement when its supporters seek to make inroads on campuses and elsewhere across the country. And I will continue to do so. And last but not least, let me congratulate Mark Treyger on taking up the burden. And let me congratulate Mike Miller on being able to lay the burden down after so many years of great leadership. Thank you very much.
What's easiest for you to get down?
This way. This way is a little easier.
Good morning, everyone. We're about 2.5 hours into this, about to hear from our 13th speaker, and the room is still packed, and I'm pretty sure I know why. Hello, my name is Jonathan Greenspun, and I too am a proud member of the JCRC Board of Directors. I am also a proud constituent of the 15th Congressional District from the state of New York. It is my honor to introduce Congressman Ricci Torres. I had a feeling that might happen. Congressman Torres serves on the House Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party, and the House Committee on Financial Services, and its two subcommittees, the Subcommittee on Housing and Insurance, and the Subcommittee on Digital Assets, Financial Technology, and Inclusion. It is my pleasure to welcome who I think is just one of the greatest friends the Jewish community has ever had in one of the most difficult times in our history, Congressmember Ricci Torres. Congressman Torres, among your many social media posts, and I would really like you to talk about social media because you have certainly taken your fair share of hits on it. In the past few days, you have alleged that the international community, quote, cut a deal with the devil through UNRWA's employment of Palestinians affiliated with Hamas. Should UNRWA, severely tainted for years by active mismanagement and association with terrorist entities like Hamas, face immediate dissolution and be subsumed by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees.
Thank you for those kind words, and thank you for the applause. I worry that you were applauding me on the assumption that I'm George Santos. And I want to set the record straight and say I'm the other gay Latino congressman from New York. The other Jewish gay Latino congressman from New York. I would never put myself in the same category as the father of Judaism, George Santos. Those jokes are going to exhaust themselves, so I have to get them out there. It is such an honor to be here. There's few people on earth that I respect and trust more deeply than my brother and friend and your future CEO, Mark Treyger. I've been in elected politics for about 10 years. I've known Mark from the moment I entered the city council. We both held the first ever city council hearing in a public housing development, amplifying the voices of public housing residents who had no heat and hot water, no permanent boilers in the wake of Superstorm Sandy. We've been in the trenches together, advocating for public housing residents, fighting for both the Jewish community and the Jewish state. I take immense pride in knowing that you're going to be the leader of JCRC. And I'm reminded of a joke. I'm probably going to mistell this story, but there's the joke about the mother of the first Jewish president. The first Jewish president is about to give his inaugural speech. His mother is right in front row, and she tells the gentleman next to her, "You know that young man up there? His brother's a doctor." And so even though Mark is not a doctor, even though he's only the CEO of one of the leading Jewish organizations in America's largest city, there's no doubt in my mind that your parents are proud of you, and friends like me are proud of you. But the problem is, we've been around for 10 years, so we're no longer young and exciting. You have young elected officials like Kenny Burgos and Eric Dinowitz and Eric Botcher. They're like the iPhone and with a BlackBerry. And no one uses the BlackBerry anymore, but maybe Brad Lander uses the BlackBerry, but I don't. By the way, I think this is like a city council reunion, for example. When I reflect on October 7th, I think about Associate Justice Robert Jackson, who wrote The Great Dissent in the Korematsu decision, and he served as the chief prosecutor in the Nuremberg trials. And in his opening statement, he said that the wrongs that we seek to condemn and punish are so malignant, so calculating, so devastating, that we cannot tolerate their being ignored because we cannot survive their being repeated. And those same words could be said about October 7th. Israel cannot tolerate October 7th being ignored because the Jewish state cannot survive it being repeated. And for me, October 7th was a crime against the Jewish state so barbaric that it cannot be ignored, it cannot go unpunished. Hamas must be brought to justice, and Israel unequivocally has a right to defend itself. I tell people, imagine speaking to an Israeli mother who just lost her baby on October 7th. I cannot imagine anything more cruel and callous than telling that mother, you and your people had this coming. You and your people brought this upon yourself. For me, this is not only about geopolitics. This is not only about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is about human decency. It is indecent to blame the victims of terrorism rather than the terrorists themselves. It is indecent to glorify the terrorism of Hamas as quote-unquote resistance or decolonization or liberation. It is indecent to tear down the posters of hostages and to promote the images of paragliders who gunned down innocent young Israelis. And I often quote Dr. King, who once said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. History will record that the greatest tragedy is not the strident clamor of the bad people, but it's the appalling silence of the good people. Right? Elie Wiesel said that the opposite of love is not hate, it is indifference. And what we've seen in the aftermath of October 7th is widespread indifference and silence and cowardice from human rights activists, from self-proclaimed progressives, from the leaders, the presidents of colleges and universities. UN Women, which is the women's rights arm of the United Nations, went 2 months without even uttering a word, without condemning the sexual atrocities perpetrated by Hamas. So what is at stake is not only the interest of the Jewish community or Israel, what is at stake is the future of our country. If we as a country cannot bring ourselves to condemn the massacre of children and civilians, the butchering of babies with moral clarity, then we must ask ourselves, what are we becoming as a society? What does that reveal about the depth of anti-Semitism in the American soul? And so for me, October 7th should be a reckoning for all Americans, Jews and non-Jews. We all have an obligation to confront the deepening rot of anti-Semitism on college campuses, on social media platforms, and in American politics. I feel America is the greatest country on earth, but not even a country as great as the United States can survive the loss of moral common sense. You know, I tell people I did not graduate from Yale or Harvard or UPenn. I did not graduate from UNRWA, but I did graduate from the School of Moral Common Sense. So, you know, there's a debate in Congress about whether there should be a ceasefire, an immediate, unconditional ceasefire. There is no greater supporter of an unconditional, immediate ceasefire than Hamas. And Hamas supports an immediate, unconditional ceasefire, not because it has any regard for Palestinian life, which it happily uses as a human shield. Hamas supports a ceasefire because an immediate ceasefire, an unconditional ceasefire, would enable Hamas to remain in power, to regroup, to rearm, and to launch even deadlier terror attacks than the atrocities of October 7th. And how do we know this? Because Hamas openly admits it. Hamas has said that October 7th was only a rehearsal, that there will be a second, and a third, and a fourth, and it seeks nothing less than the destruction of Israel as a Jewish state. And so we ignore the genocidal mission of Hamas at our own peril. And I find it telling that most of the international community is pressuring Israel to enter into a ceasefire that keeps Hamas in power and the hostages in captivity. But very few people are pressuring Hamas to surrender unconditionally and release the hostages and end a war that has brought untold suffering to both Israelis and Palestinians. And speaking of double standards, you know, no one expected the United States to enter into a ceasefire with Imperial Japan when more than 2,000 Americans were murdered in Pearl Harbor. No one expected the United States to enter into a ceasefire with Nazi Germany when Adolf Hitler declared war on the United States in the wake of Pearl Harbor. And I was alive back then. No one expected the United States to enter into a ceasefire with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda when 3,000 Americans were brutally murdered on 9/11. And so why is Israel the sole exception to the rule of self-defense, which is the right of every nation, including the Jewish nation? You know, those who insist that Israel should forfeit the right of self-defense amid the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust are holding the Jewish state to a dangerous double standard that no other country, including the United States, would ever impose on itself. And so I'll end on this note, because I'm the 13th speaker, which I think is a sign of my considerable influence in the United States Congress. Who am I to question the dogma of seniority? But a few months ago, I had the honor of speaking at the March for Israel and the March Against Anti-Semitism and the March to release the hostages. And I want to thank the families of the survivors and hostages for having the courage to tell your story. Your voice has been indispensable, and there's no doubt in my mind that we're going to secure the release of the hostages, that we are as close as ever, and we're going to keep pressuring the Qatari government to secure the release of the hostages. But a few months ago, I had the honor of speaking at the march, which was an overwhelming experience on a personal level. I never thought life would take me on a journey from public housing in the Bronx to the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., and here I am speaking at the National Mall in front of 300,000 people. And as I was speaking, I was reminded that the year in which I spoke, 2023, was historic in more ways than one. It was both the 60th anniversary of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech and the 75th anniversary of the rebirth of Israel. And those words, I have a dream, reminded me that the Jewish people have long had a dream of Jewish emancipation through a Jewish state. Right? Israel is the realization of a dream that is both ancient and modern. And Israel has endured for 76 years. And there's no doubt in my mind that that realized dream, aided by the U.S.-Israel relationship, will endure for the next 76 years and beyond. And I am honored to be a small part in supporting that relationship. So thank you for having me. And I should, well, I forgot to answer your question. But I will quickly, I was asked about UNRWA, which is a controversial topic in Congress, but my view is we need to find an alternative that provides humanitarian aid to Palestinians without subsidizing anti-Semitic indoctrination. I'm of the view that hate will never bring peace. It will only bring more violence, more war, more senseless suffering to Israelis and Palestinians. When I was watching the raw footage of October 7th, there was one moment that struck me. There was one of the Hamas terrorists picked up the phone of the victim, called his parents, and boasted about murdering 10 Jews with his own hands. He was boasting about it. He was bragging to his parents. And that's the kind of hate that is propagated by institutions like UNRWA, and that is the kind of hate that will perpetuate the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so if we're serious about achieving a sustainable peace, we have to confront hate as one of the root causes of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Last time I saw you was Shabbat, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
How that
Folks, 2 more minutes of your time before we go. I know everybody's excited to go for lunch, but we're not serving lunch. I want to just thank all of our members of Congress. I want to just thank all of the members of Congress and all of the elected officials who joined us this morning, all of our good friends and partners from all over New York City and Long Island and Westchester who joined us this morning. I want to give a very special thank you, probably the most important thank you in the room, to Esther Sperber and Omer Granot, who are the chief organizers of the Hostages and Missing Families Forum, who got together this wonderful delegation here, who should not have been here in the first place. We look forward next year when this is not an issue of Jewish communal concern. We look forward to making sure that all of the hostages who are sitting in Gaza under Hamas captivity right now are brought home. If you look on your tables, this is the part where you look at your tables, you'll see, hold it up, Perry. This is our Focus on Communal Priorities document. There's a lot of work that goes into this. It's a bestseller. I want you all to look at the front cover. Each one of those people has been deeply affected by their captivity in Hamas, and we have a responsibility as Americans who support the U.S.-Israel relationship and as human beings to make sure that all of them are home. And I know that each and every one of you is going to do everything you can to bring them home. That is the key takeaway from this breakfast. I want all of you to understand that now is the time to use your voices. Now is the time to contact your members of Congress. And if you don't know what to say, look in the book. The language is right there. I also want to thank Craig Newmark for being a sponsor of this wonderful event. Thank you, Craig. Second time in a row. JCRC is also very privileged to have wonderful partners. I mentioned a few of them before, but there's three in particular that I forgot to mention. Hey, guys, I'll get to you in a sec. Scott Richmond, head of the ADL in New York and New Jersey. Josh Kramer, head of the American Jewish Committee here in New York. And David Greenfield, head of Met Council here in New York. I also want to acknowledge all of our board members, so I'm going to do it real fast. Oh, and Tamras Azeri, head of the Azerbaijani Society of America. Right there. I'm sorry. There's a lot of people. Our board members, Ezra Friedlander, Ruchi Fryer, Steve Cohen, Ruth Leah Frankel-Freeberg, Gene Rachmansky, Jonathan Greenspan, Stuart Mordfin, Sarah Ashman, Brian Cohen, Shimmy Pellman, Max Levine, George Arts, Janice Shorenstein, former past president, Brad Korn, Jessica Haller, Stuart Kahn, Mendy Marachnik, Eric Rechtschaffen, Lauren Jupiter, Steve Cohn, Karen Kasner, Sandy Atignas, Jen Falk, Mike Emmerman, Jay Hershenson, Gail Port, John Adelsberg, and three special people before y'all go. First, Chair of the Board, Cheryl Fishbein. The President of JCRC, Ben Golub. And last but not least, I think he's everybody's friend in this room. His name has been mentioned a few times. Every time his name is mentioned, I get a quarter. That's how salaries work here. So I want to give a special shout out to Rabbi Michael Miller. I also want to acknowledge all of the staff of JCRC, our staff, our board members, everybody who worked on the Focus on Communal Priorities document and making this event great. Jen Falk, Rebecca Futterman, Marcy Fishman, Ezra Friedlander, Jennifer Glick, Howard Pollack, and Sephora Shapiro. You guys did an amazing job. And I also want to thank Margot Paz and Dan Rosenthal from UJA for their help. And we thank you all for being here. And we look forward to seeing you all very soon at our gala on May 20th, honoring Karen Kasner, Anna Prop Reisenberg, I know, it's riveting, and Morton Williams Supermarkets. Have a great day. Perfect. You know, we did exactly what we needed to do. Like, just, and it was like, all right. Can I retire now? Am I good?
Thank you. Everything really well done.